Welcome back to the Spiritual Deep Dive in 5. This is the 26th day of our 40 days of powerful worship experiences, which let me just remind you that we're doing this so that we can have 40 days where we just intentionally try to say, what could we do that would allow us to have more experiences in our normal everyday life where we're connecting with God and having those elevated conversations. And so we hope that this podcast has helped you do that. And I hope you go back and check out the 25 other episodes where we look through those opportunities. But let me share with you this passage where I hope you'll listen because it reveals what God thinks about you, something that you'd never think about yourself. It comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 5, 16 through 20, and I like it in the Message translation. It says this: God has put the world square with himself through the Messiah, giving the world a fresh start by offering forgiveness of sins. God has given us the task of telling everyone what he is doing. We are Christ's representatives. That's what you are, according to God, Christ's representative. And God uses us, it goes on to say this, God uses us to persuade men and women to drop their differences and to enter into God's work of making things right between them. We're speaking for Christ himself now. Become friends with God. He's already a friend with you. Man, it's interesting because God thinks of me as one of his ambassadors. And the only thing that makes me wonder is how many conversations do you and I have each week where we're talking about other people? I mean, it seems like one of America's favorite pastimes other than baseball is talking endlessly about others when they're not around. I mean, have you ever noticed that other people's issues are always so easy to solve for you? Have you ever noticed that you and your spouse seem to be the expert on helping other people get their life all together? I mean, telling people who they are and what they should be doing seems to be one of our unofficial career titles. If only those people could just hear what we have to say to them. But of course, they never will, because we never tell them. We often don't share any of our thoughts and opinions that we spend endlessly talking about at home of these people with the person. We don't tell them at all. We simply keep that to ourselves and the 13 other people we've talked with about it. See, God, he's not like that. God is not like that. God loves to tell you and I directly who we are. God spends most of God's time in the Bible reminding people of who they are and what they could be and become, and never gives up on reminding us directly who we are. God loves us not just for who we are, but also for who God sees us becoming throughout our entire life. You may not feel like it, but God sees you as one of his best ambassadors, or as the Message Bible puts it, Christ's representative. We tend to think only pastors, priests, and popes are the kind of people that would be called an ambassador for Jesus. But God thinks that's what you are too. That's what he says of you. We get to do that. He thinks you're that person. There's really just two issues we face when we are confronted with what God says about us. Number one, we usually simply don't agree with God. And number two, we'd rather talk about God with people who already know God. I mean, like, God says you're his ambassador, and typically that would mean we go to talk about people that need to hear that, but we tend to just gravitate to people that already know that information. You see, God has lots of things to say to other people and to us, and he wants us to represent that message. God tells us directly who we are, and he patiently works with us in that process. Why aren't we like that with other people? Why aren't we more direct? And why aren't we more patient with others? Why must we gossip and tell people someone else's bad news or avoid crucial conversations that could actually serve somebody? Maybe it's time for us to make a commitment and discipline ourselves about limiting the negativity we will let just fall out of our mouths about other people. Maybe it's time for some of us to release and let go of all the ways we are trying to control and manipulate other people's decisions. Maybe the thing we don't want to do the most is exactly what we need to do, which is go have an honest, patient, vulnerable conversation. This is what God does for us, and we have to take our cues from God. God is convinced that you are one of his best representatives, and God likes it that way. We absolutely can share with others what God thinks of them too. We don't have to wait for the perfect opportunity. It's the other person who is waiting on us. What if we lived like we were exactly who God said we were? And let's be thankful that people do not have to be who we often say they are. Let's make sure and go to ccf.church/2021 for some practical ways and suggestions on how you can follow through with today's ideas and share with others about who God says they are.